We often talk about finding balance as if it's a perfect scale we can master. But what if the real missing piece isn't balance at all? What if it's the lines we refuse to draw? Today on Chris and Jen in the Morning, the team dives deep into the world of boundaries, not just as a concept, but as a vital act of self-care.
We have been talking about this episode for a while. So we're going to talk about boundaries today and do it book club style. Very excited. This book Nedra Glover-Tawwab wrote called Set Boundaries, Find Peace.
From the struggle of being a people pleaser to the realization that porous boundaries might be holding us back, Chris, Jen, and Ace explore how setting expectations can finally lead to peace. It's time to stop trying to have it all and start protecting what matters most. Let's get into it.
Welcome to Chris and Jen in the Morning,
where self-care meets real life. I'm Chris.
I'm Jen.
And I'm Ace.
Ace is back.
Back again. Guess
Ace
who's
is
back? Tell a friend.
I was legally and ethically required to be here for a second week. They haven't let me leave the house. If you can send help, I would really appreciate it.
No, don't.
Don't send help.
We
fine.
feed him. He sees the sunlight. There's occasionally
water
He's also left the
everywhere.
house more than me since the last time we recorded.
He's fine. See, he just took a swig of water. He's fine.
He's fine. He's fine.
Which we all know fine is perfectly great.
Oh, he's good.
How quickly we pivoted from fine to great.
He's good. We're actually super excited to have Ace back. We have been talking about this episode for a while.
Sure have.
So we're going to talk about boundaries today and do it book club style. Very excited. This book Nedra Glover-Tawwab wrote called Set Boundaries, Find Peace. If you are watching or not watching, Chris is holding it up. He's got a physical copy in his hand. We've all listened to the audio book version as well. And so we're going to talk about that, what we learned from that, all of the experiences we've had in reading this book together. And we would love to invite you into the conversation. So we want you to be a part of our community, whether you are reading this book or not reading this book, whether you are wanting to talk about boundaries or any of the other topics that we talk about, check us out. You can find us on our website, www.chrisandjenitm.com. And that is where you can sign up for our newsletter. You can join like any of our social communities. You can find past episodes. You can check out what we're doing in our free time. We're probably due for an update with some more photos.
Probably,
but you'll be here in town.
In a few weeks.
Yeah, in a few weeks.
We'll update it after that visit.
More shenanigans to come. Super excited about that. But really, we could have this conversation not on camera. And honestly, it would probably be way more comfortable for the three of us. But we decided we wanted to start having this conversation together on camera to record it so that we could actually invite others along on this journey to find happiness and live a richer, more fulfilled life. And so we would love for you to be a part of that. So if you're not already subscribed or following us, hit the button, join us, leave a comment, let us know what you think, be a part of our community. With that said, let's move to gratitude moments, shall we?
Let's do it.
Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. As we are recording this episode, I just have to give a shout out to all of the women in my life. It is International Women's Day, the day we are recording this episode, and I would not be where I am today without all of the wonderful women who I've had in my life. Everyone from my mom to my aunts to my grandmas, like the whole kit and caboodle, if you will. You know, it has been a life of lived experiences and always having these people who are there for you and who can support you and provide you insights and just help along the way is so important. And I am blessed, fortunate, all of the things to have so many wonderful people who have helped me in my personal life, but also in my career, and people who even now get to call my friends, my colleagues who are women, and I so appreciate what they bring to my life. So a shout out to all the women out there for everything that they bring in all of the big and little ways. It is a blessing and an honor to have you in my life.
Yes, amazing. And happy International Women's Day. We're super excited to celebrate that. That's amazing. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, my gratitude moment is that here in Texas, the spring has sprung. So in our backyard, I sit there and I'll look out the window and there's trees and bushes and for the last several months it's all been dead this, dead that, and then just in the last week it seems like everything has started to bloom and started to come full of life with color, and it is double-edged gratitude moment because I've also cried more tears from allergy pressure. But there is something really gratifying about just watching life re-bloom and take the winter over and bring us something, something colorful and full of life.
A pop of color.
That's beautiful. It really is. Well, my gratitude moment today, I was thinking this past week about all of the little things, the many, many little things that I have taken the time to just savor and enjoy. And one of the little moments, we had a spring rainstorm come through, and I was sitting in my bed just listening to the sound of the rain come down, and it was like this peaceful little rain. I heard the cicadas going, so it wasn't really raining much. And I just thought, this is like just really peaceful and serene and beautiful. And I'm really grateful that I can sit here, not in the rain, like in this cozy space in my bedroom, that Ace has worked really hard to make this really beautiful, cozy space that's calm, and listen to the rain and the cicadas and just kind of have a moment of serenity amidst life. So that was one of the moments that just stood out to me this week, was this experience of calm serenity in the middle of everyday life. So
yeah, I do have to say, like, on days when it's like really sunny and bright out, and then all of a sudden like a rainstorm happens, and it's not like it's enough to like cover the sun, right? Like, so it's raining and the sunlight is still out. Like, I always just find myself like, that just brings a smile to my, like, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's like the juxtaposition of having like the sun out while rain is also falling. And it's just like this like weird sensation. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I've had it now more that I've lived in New York than I did in Texas. But like, I like this, the rain is, when I don't have to be in it, just to be clear, is absolutely like, it's grounding for some reason.
And it connects you with nature. Yeah. So it's beautiful.
All right. Well, we have gratitude amongst the three of us.
We do. So now we're going to talk about boundaries. And the reason that we are talking about this book is my therapist actually gave me this book to read. He was like, Jen, I feel like you could benefit from reading this book. And I was like, oh, I don't want to read this book.
But when our therapists give us homework, we do it.
We do it. We may grumble about it. We may not do it like our life depends on it. It may take us some time to do it. Like, look,
there was no timeline assigned to this.
There was no timeline assigned.
It's a good point. Was there a deadline?
There was not. But, it was kind of like, look, I'm reading the book, okay? Give me the book. I'm reading the book.
If he's listening now, he'll start giving deadlines.
I don't know that we need that.
Good. Just put it out there.
I mean, the point is, it is me trying to better myself.
My
Right.
therapist is giving me anxiety on my timeline. I've got deliverables for my therapy.
We'll talk about it in our next session.
I don't need to be pushed. I will find, I'm working on bettering myself, but I decided that if I was going to work on bettering myself, that all of my closest friends should do it too.
We should all go on this journey together.
You know, those friends that are like pushers, like they get into something like vegetarian or like Pilates, and they're just like, go do this with me.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm really glad I don't have those types of friends. I will read a book with you both, but if you try to convert me to vegetarianism, I just don't think it's going to work out for me.
We're going to stretching class together.
That actually would probably be helpful.
Do they have a napping class? I just want to go on those little mats and lay down and listen to the nice music and just sleep.
They do. There's this, like, you pay money to go lay on a raft in a pool. And they make it like
deprivation chambers?
Quiet. No. It's like all of these people floating on rafts and pools, and you have like the people who are managing it standing in the pool.
I feel really uncomfortable. I don't think I could sleep.
You haven't seen that?
No.
It's like some like relaxation. And I just keep going. Look, every time it comes up and I see it, I'm like, that does not look relaxing.
I don't know why, but what you described sounds like there's a kiddie pool with like one of those little inflatable rafts, and there's this lady just standing there like, go to sleep already.
Why aren't you sleeping
This is your nap time.
It's like waist deep for most people, so gotta be like chest deep for Jen.
Jen rolls off and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's what I would be afraid of.
And I'll send you a picture of it.
Next time you see it, send it over.
I don't remember what they called it, but I just was like, not for me. Swipe left does not look relaxing. Anyway.
But this was a book. This was a book that was assigned to you.
Around. I got this book assigned to me by my therapist. And I thought, I should make some other people read it with me, because honestly, that's going to give me a little bit of accountability to have to read the book. And so I told you about it, and you actually were like, oh, great, I will read it. Sign me up. And I was like, but would you read it and just tell me about it? I don't have to read it.
Well, I definitely would have said no to that, but I'm pretty sure we may have debated like reading it like, book version, or reading it as in my audiobook
listening
version.
To it or reading it. And then I read it, and I think we were like, I was reading it, listening to it, and then switched to reading it. But I was getting through it while driving back and forth to visit my parents, and I was not getting through it. Like, I just kept getting stuck. And then I think was it when I got done with it that I was like, Ace, you really should read this book.
Yes, because you were needling me to read it, but I was like, well, I'm only going to listen to it. So once you're done, then I will listen to it.
Yeah. So I had to get done with it so that I could make Ace listen to it. It was like a whole accountability thing. But I will say, while it was difficult for me personally to get through this book, and my therapist would say, interesting. Was it difficult? Because of the book or because of the content in the book? Maybe this is something you really needed to experience. I think we each had a different take on it, but we all took away something great from it. And so we wanted to come here and just have a little discussion about what we learned about boundaries, using this book as like the framework for that. So I have some questions to kind of help us talk through this that I thought I would ask us. And then, you guys just pop in with whatever it is that you want to share as we walk through this. Does that sound good?
Yeah. Do you mind if I do just like a quick setup of what the book is? Okay. So like Jen said, the book is called Set Boundaries, Find Peace, A Guide to Reclaiming Yourself by Nedra Glover-Tawwab. She actually narrates the audio version of this book, which I have come to learn that really the author narrating like 50-50. People either love that or really don't like that. But whether or not you're into that, this book she has structured, I found, in a very helpful way. So the first half is really about like understanding boundaries, why we may struggle with them, and why they matter as much in our lives. And then the second half is really, which I appreciate, right? Like I want to know the theory, but then I'm not like, the theory doesn't always stick with me. I kind of sometimes want it like grounded in the actual how does this show up in real life. So I feel like that's what the second part of this book was about. It's all about how we actually set boundaries in real life, whether it be with family, with your colleagues at work, in friendships, and all those places that we really sometimes can find ourselves in those uncomfortable situations. So, and she does clearly define, because right, the entire book is about boundaries, and one of the ways that she clearly defines it in the way that she's addressing boundaries is that it's really important. It's an important part of self-care, and it's understanding how boundaries protect yourself mentally, emotionally, and in some cases financially. So it's all about like these things that we're putting into place to protect ourselves and to make sure that we are being true to who we are. So that's just a quick, like, very high level perspective on what the book is about.
I did find the second half of the book easier to get through than the first.
Oh, that's interesting.
I also switched to reading it, so I don't know that
Okay.
there might have been that, but I was listening to part of it through the second half, but I did find the second like section of the book easier to get through. She does use examples in the first of like
Yeah.
how these things show up in everyday life. I just kept going, I would never say that. And my therapist would ask like, well, is that because you're not good at setting boundaries?
Yeah.
But also, I don't know. Some of it seemed a little intense. But we'll talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing is about understanding, and again, like she kind of describes this at the beginning, like, boundaries are the expectations and the needs to help you feel safe and comfortable in your relationships. And
Yes.
I think relationships was used very broadly in this, but I think she did a great job as like she goes through the book, like giving those examples and explaining.
Defining that.
Yeah.
So that leads into my first question, which is before reading the book. What did the word boundaries mean to you?
I think it's like making space for yourself. Like making, because when you think about boundaries, like for a house, or an apartment, it's like if within these walls or within this boundary, this is about me. Like this is about like what I can do or what I'm allowing to get close to me. And so whenever I think of boundaries, I always think of like property lines or apartment walls, or
Mm.
because to me that means like I'm safe here or I'm comfortable here or I only allow the people I can really let into this space.
So it's like a guard that defines a space around you. And that's what you've thought before reading the book, after reading the book, both?
I would say before. That was my impression of the idea of boundaries.
What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I think mine was I think it was very much more theoretical in the idea of boundaries, and specifically around like the boundaries that you live in. Are they your own? And I think that was my big aha moment through like reading this, was like how boundaries are we have them, and in certain situations like we are taught boundary making, and sometimes we inadvertently end up adopting other people's boundaries as our own, whether or not you agree that they are or not. So to me, this like provided more of like it questioned the boundaries that I thought I had, and are these mine, or are these actual things that I learned and I now like have had in place because that's how I grew up. Like, and I know that that's not, I feel like Ace gave a really good answer about the clear definition and understanding like who's allowed in what space.
No.
But for me, it was like, I think it was very much so that, but then this book like had me questioning, like, are these my boundaries? Or are these boundaries that like
This is
I've
something I've
adopted,
learned.
right?
Yeah.
Like that I've like taken on as mine whenever I actually don't. Did I ever put this boundary in place?
Yeah. That's so interesting. I think before I read the book, my understanding of boundaries was like things that I will or will not do. That would be probably how I would have defined that.
Like in a very black and white way.
Like what I'm willing to give up or not, things I will or will not do. Like using that to subconsciously decide how I prioritize things, or, and I think I also had this understanding that like boundaries are supposed to be a good thing, but like less as scale. So in reading the book, my understanding, like through most of the book, at the beginning, I was like, yeah, I apparently have like no boundary setting skills. And then there was a portion of the book that I got to that I was like, oh yeah, I have too rigid of a boundary here. And
Oh,
that's
okay.
my challenge with this is that in this area, I have really rigid boundaries. And I think that actually is when I think about other people that have, that have used the word boundary before, that's, and like read other books about boundaries. That was the impression that I walked away with is like, oh, boundaries are these really rigid things that you put up to say, I will or won't do this. And they feel really inflexible and, um, just kind of like a wall.
Yeah.
And there's a portion kind of towards, I can't remember where, but like later in the book where she's talking about some examples of somebody that has some really rigid boundaries that have served them well, getting through experiences like trauma in their lives, but they're starting to become a hindrance, now that they're no longer in those trauma situations and they still have those really rigid boundaries. And I was like there are some things in here that I could really relate to. So in some areas, like I have really poor boundaries and I don't put boundaries in place or enforce them or hold them or respect them or whatever it is that you want to say. And in other areas, my boundaries are too rigid. And
Yeah.
I guess I always thought of boundaries as being rigid, like what you will or won't do
Yeah.
versus a boundary that is less about putting a wall up and
Yeah.
more about thinking how do you protect what it is that you're prioritizing. So that's really interesting. I mean, I have said in the past as I've been talking to like coworkers about balance and finding work-life balance, I think I started to understand prior to reading this that it's not really balance that we're dealing with, it's boundaries because we want to have it all and we're trying to figure out how to have it all and we just have
Yeah.
really poor boundaries. And so we are searching for this thing called work-life balance because what we really are looking for is just to have it all and we're not willing to say no to anything. And
Well,
then
the
we feel
idea of balance is like
yeah,
actually finding, like, if you put a marble on one
yeah,
side, you have to put a marble of equal
on the other.
equivalence on
Yeah.
the other.
Yeah, how do I go all in on my career and all in on my family and all in on my friends and all in on myself? I
Right.
mean, you literally can't go all in on all of the things. And so how do you create balance where
Uh-huh.
you're giving the appropriate amount so that you're not overspending of
Right.
your energy budget?
So are you saying like in this, like you found that the difference in like the definition of balance and boundaries are two different things?
Yeah, I think I sort of had that concept coming in. But
Okay.
what I thought was, okay, so it's not really about balance, it's about setting boundaries, but boundaries are rigid, right? So I just need to be more rigid in if I want to be good at this, I need to be more rigid in saying I will never do this.
Yeah.
I will always do this. And then that's not practical. And so then you find, well, I guess boundaries just don't work for me. And that was
Yeah.
my like out for not having to lean in and figure out how to set them. As a person who gets a lot of like serotonin, dopamine hits from pleasing other people and getting that satisfaction from other people, it's really hard to set
Yeah.
a boundary because that is literally the opposite of people pleasing. It
Yeah.
is, and sometimes it feels, if you're not used to it, like it's selfish,
Yeah.
but it's actually not. And so I think there were just a lot of whether you like the style in which the book is written or not, there's a lot of really good things to think about from that perspective.
I thought
Yeah.
about, like, you were talking about balance and boundaries. I was always thinking about you give boundaries to things that have priority in your life. Because the minute you don't set a boundary for something that's a priority, others take that space or others will call claim to that. Like for me growing up, my dad was always working, right? And so he was just always gone and never really, or when he would show up, it would just be a surprise. And his thing was, well, if you want to see me, just come to work. Like, you come work for me, and then you'll see me all the time. And as I was growing up, I went to therapy quite a bit. And so I heard boundaries, like, I think I was like 17. And they told me, they were like, well, that's because your dad doesn't have a life outside of work. His work is what defines his life. And so if you want to have that, you have to set it as a boundary. And so as I was getting older, as I like went into the military and then afterwards, I always thought, hey, I am going to be that guy that if it's 5 o'clock, I'm going to go home and be with my family. I'm going to, prioritize vacations. Because that is going to be a boundary for me. Now, life happens and you learn that you have to make money and you have to have stable life for your family. And so you do work those longer hours and those things. But in my head, I always said, when we're more successful, I will make that a priority. I will make, but it was that learning of a boundary that, like, if I don't set it as a priority, other people will just claim it and move on, and it won't matter to me anymore as much. So when you're talking about that balance, that's what I always think of.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I was listening, like I got fed in one of my feeds a talk around the Eisenhower matrix. Have y'all heard of that? Where it's like the x-axis is the non-important and important, and on the y-axis is the urgent and not urgent.
Yes.
And I do think, like, Ace, to what you're talking about, like, in our lives, we have to understand where, like, in what categories these things fall into. Because if you don't have boundaries, like, you can this becomes very, like, wishy-washy, and, like, you end up feeling spread too thin, and you're not at the place where something is urgent and important because you're mixed up in the thing that's, like, not urgent and not important. Like, it's just a matter of, like, this, like, if you don't understand these things, like, your boundaries keep you from moving into those spaces unintentionally, I think. And so I had just recently heard this, and I had a callback as you were talking about that, because I was just like, oh, if you have really strong boundaries in these areas, like, you probably have less slippage in your life because you understand, like, where, maybe not less slippage, but it's more intentional, I guess, the actions that you're taking, which I ultimately think is her, like, you're being intentional about the time, energy, and effort you have that you're putting into things.
Well, and I think she acknowledges that though she is educated in this subject matter, writing a book on it, talking about how to apply it, can intellectually understand it. Even she struggles with these things. And so I think for me, there was just this reminder of, okay, this isn't about read a book, gain a skill, become, proficient. This is about changing the way that you think so that you can take that, put yourself back in the driver's seat, take that agency and claim it over what you really want, versus feeling like you're at the mercy of everybody or everything else.
Yeah.
Which I think is so often how we default to. At least I know for us, who all three of us have that people pleasing bent to us. And so that was really interesting. Okay, so next question. What was a moment in the book where you personally felt called out?
I know mine specifically. She's talking about, like, identifying certain characteristics of people who struggle with boundaries, and she calls it the ACE IQ test. And I felt so personally attacked. I had to stop the book and call Jen and say, why did you not warn me that there is a psychology test called ACE and that I have failed this test, or at least not done what I thought I was going to do on this test?
I think it's relating to, like, trauma, right? That was the chapter 8, the trauma chapter.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, you personally felt specifically called out, as in she used your name.
She used your name. Well, I was going to say, like, for me, it was very much so, like, this moment where she was talking about relationships and how we have a tendency in our minds to, like, create these boundaries and hear, but we don't ever actually say them. And so when people don't live up or, cross those boundaries that we then get upset and we're so mad, like, how could they do that to me? And it's like, right, but did you ever say that? And I think one of the beautiful things she does throughout the book is she actually uses real life examples. And
Yeah.
I want to say there was someone that I identified with that is like seeing her for help. And I was like, oh God, I feel that person. But like, I never knew that I did that until Frank and I were living together and he called me out on it. Like one day he said something to me and I just blew up, and there was no, like, I went from 0 to 100 in like a second.
Yeah.
And he explained to me, like, if you are upset, if something is not working or you're not like, I can't change it if I don't know about it. And logically, that makes a lot of sense.
It does. It does make a lot of sense.
But emotionally, I'm like, what do you mean you can't read my mind?
Well, I do think there's a point in the book where she actually calls out something about on this topic, something about I know how sometimes we just want the other people to know what we need them to do without articulating it.
Yeah.
Because if you articulate it, then it feels like it doesn't mean as much. But that's not how it works. And felt familiar.
Yeah.
That felt familiar for sure.
I would say real quickly, I would say that when she talked about how boundaries are taught at the family level, that was like personally identifying to me. If you've ever
Yeah.
seen like My Big Fat Greek Wedding or any of those shows where like culturally you're like in this familiar unit and life happens inside of that, and then if there's anything on the outside looking in, the boundary was always like, well, hey, if it's happening in this family, everybody's going to know about it and nobody. But then like when I left and I went to like the military or, I went to college, it was like coming back into that unit and being the outsider coming back into it. So when I grew up, that boundary was whatever happens in our lives is all going to be co-intermingled. And I didn't know this concept of like people being able to have like private moments or private, situations to themselves that didn't involve their whole family knowing everything about the situation. And it was one of those things where she talked about it and I was like, that's why like it took me so long, especially when we were first married, to be able to like change that dynamic and think about my life outside of the family boundaries and understanding that like the way we acted in that family were not the way that we would act outside of it, like, to start our
In
lives
our own
new.
family.
And
Yeah.
and so that was like, I was like, oh, I never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. She talks about boundaries in so many different facets of life and so many different phases of life. While there are certain things that I think I struggle with across the board, you see it showing up differently, like from a work standpoint or, a friendship standpoint or a social commitment standpoint or in the family. And so that was interesting too, to kind of think about. So speaking of, growing up, did anything in the book challenge how you were raised to think about helping people or being nice?
I'm going to jump in because I think it very much so goes on the heels of what you were saying, Ace. So in that conversation she was having about family, so I had a lot of like personal things going on in my life when this was happening or when I was reading this book. So I was very grateful for it because some of it was validating in the idea of what you are allowed to want and have in your life versus like the challenge of, well, is this your boundary or is this something that you have adopted as your boundary? And it goes directly back to that idea of your family. You begin to learn boundary setting from your family. So like I always grew up with this family does anything for each other. Absolutely anything. Whether you need help moving, whether you need help with childcare, whether you need help financially, like you show up for your family no matter what. And I really struggled when I moved to New York City, and I've talked about it, like I lived very close to everyone that I my family back when I lived in Texas. And so here, like, you're adding all of this like distance, and then you still have this pressure of, well, how do you show up for your family within within a year of me moving here? Like, my grandfather passed away. I had a nephew that was born. Like, all of these things were happening, and I just felt like I was letting my family down. And so, like, it really at that time had me questioning, like, what does this mean to do, like, be there for your family?
Yeah.
And then as I've, like, distance makes it easier to grow and change and evolve. And so as I was reading this and going through the things that I was in my life at that time, it really helped, like, just kind of ground me in that, look, you are doing what you can, and that's okay. It is okay for you to not have to do more. It is okay for you to not have to bend over backwards. Or in some cases, you are bending over backwards. Are you jeopardizing your health? Are you jeopardizing your other relationships because of this? Like, it challenged me in a lot of good ways, but it was hard. Like,
Yeah.
it felt very, like, pointed.
Yeah. I will say that I held this belief that I didn't really kind of realize as a belief, that other people's needs were more important than my comfort level with meeting those needs. And so it wasn't really about, often, not always, but often, it wasn't really about what I needed for myself, or that wasn't even something that I should be thinking about. Instead, it's somebody needs something, and you just drop everything to fill that gap.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting that that's how I've always shown up in every relationship, but just kind of this and then when you don't do those things, feeling really guilty about not showing up that way,
Yeah.
and then like carrying that guilt around. And so, like, how can you ever feel like you're doing a good job? Because by somebody's standards, whether yourself or somebody else's, you're failing at that. That was something that I think I really struggled with a lot. And when I think about like work and wanting to, just like always make everybody happy all the time at work, and there's like this gratification that I'm getting from that, right? Like this value seeking, my own personal self-worth and value from that I've been working on in therapy for the last several years to try and identify and decouple. And then there's this, but it's really tempting because it feels good
Yeah.
to get that kind of gratification. And then there's this, like, you need to show up for your family, but then there are different ways you can show up for your family. And I know, especially early on, I always thought, well, I'm going to do what's needed to create this financial stability that, is going to take away like worry and stress of money. And so, but I'm taking away my time in order to do that. And so always feeling like you're, like failing somewhere there. And, the list kind of goes on as you roll through the rest of your life. And then, the person you get to kind of last is yourself.
Right.
And so then you just walk around feeling like you're always disappointing somebody and you're resentful of it because you're also not fulfilling what it is that you need. And when my therapist first started asking me about this, he was like, what is it that's important to you? What is it that you want? And I was like, I don't understand that question. Like, what do you mean? Where's this, like, I want to make everybody else happy. No, but what is it that you want? And so I'm not trying to sound like I'm this like selfless, person, because that's not what I'm trying to describe at all. But, just this constant feeling of pressure to always show up when people ask you to go somewhere, even if it's not somewhere you want to be, or, to do what's asked of you at work, even when it's in conflict with priorities for your family, or to, where you spend the holidays. Even if you're miserable spending and that actually is a boundary that we set fairly early on in raising our kid, because we did try and please everyone and make everybody happy, and nobody was happy, least of all us. And so more for our kid than for myself, I said, like, we're not doing this anymore. We're going to spend Christmas in our own house. Christmas morning, and we're going to give that to our kid. And if other people want to show up at our house, great. We'll do things that are not Christmas morning, but Christmas morning is in our own house.
Yeah.
And
I do think it's important to like call out that she does differentiate like your
Yeah.
family, the unit that you are living with currently versus like as you evolve in life, like your extended family. So
Yeah.
she does like the examples that she uses does call out like your in-laws and your, you know, your sister who lives with so and so. Like she does a good job of like differentiating that. So I do like we're throwing around the word family, but like
Yeah.
she does differentiate
Your kind of
the-
immediate family versus your
Right.
extended family.
Yeah.
So that was interesting.
I would say the boundaries that we place for ourselves. There was I can't remember the exact point, but there is something about, she talks about how when you set a boundary with somebody else, the first person that has to maintain it is yourself, meaning you don't go back on your own boundaries,
Yes.
because that's like such an easy thing to do is, oh, well, it's okay this one time, telling yourself that. Like, it's okay they did this. I think the example that she gave is like the mom showed up unannounced or something. And it's like she talks about how it's really hard for yourself because you feel guilty and you feel like I'm being a bad person and I'm like all these things. And I totally relate to that because that's how my family, my growing up family had always treated everything of, well, if you do something to the family, you should feel guilty. You're disappointing everybody. Like, and so I grew up with that mentality of like, well, you know, I don't really like doing this. I don't really like to have these interactions, but
Yeah.
gonna make an exception. And I'm, you know, and that's kind of what I talked about earlier, where it's like, boy, if you don't give yourself priority for what's important to you, other people will just take it from you. Like they'll
Yeah.
just see it as an opportunity of, well, Ace will give in and he'll give me $50 or, you know, whatever. He'll drive me to Timbuktu because he's a good guy. He'll just do it, you know?
Right.
And it's like, I'm not prioritizing my boundaries to myself to be, hey, no, I'm not going to do that. I've, you know, that's, you know, and that was the second thing is she's like, don't give excuses. Like, just say no, like, and leave it. And that was
Yeah.
another thing where it's like, I forget to do that because I still want to make an excuse to make them feel better or to give me an out or
Yeah.
I don't know. But she does a really good job of telling you to be, just say no. Like, and that's it.
You don't have to explain it. You don't have to
explain.
justify it.
Yeah.
I agree. Like I don't think you need to justify, and I think if you set that boundary and you tell someone, but I do think there may be a learning opportunity if they ask why. And a like personal example of mine, like after I came out, I had gone to the church my parents were going to for I think one of my nephews like baby dedications or something. I don't know what they called it, but I had gone because like we were going as a family and fine, whatever, I don't care. But I went and like the pastor at the time, like made it very clear, like the only relationship that God would ever ordain is one between a man and a woman, and like the household, whatever. And at that point, like I was in therapy because I was like going through all of my own crap about coming out and having to live all of that. And I started to understand like how the places you put yourself, you can protect yourself and you should protect yourself.
Yes.
And so I distinctly remember after going to that service, I was like, I'm never going back there. I'm never going to put myself in a situation where I felt like attacked without necessarily being named exactly. Like it was a weird feeling that I had. And so I remember like I was having a conversation. My mom and I went and had coffee one day. I think it was like close to Mother's Day or her birthday or something. And I was like, oh, what do you want to do for Mother's Day or your birthday, whichever it was? And she's like, oh, well, what if like we all go to church together and then we can, you know, go have lunch or whatever. And I just said like, oh, well, like, where do you want to have lunch? And, you know, I can meet y'all there or whatever. And she was like, we had the conversation, but then she circled back and she was like, is there a reason you don't want to go to church with us? And so I could have very easily just been like, not interested, don't want to. It's a boundary that I'm setting for myself, whatever. But I felt like it was a great opportunity to kind of inform and educate her on like what it felt like to be an LGBTQ person sitting in that church and hearing something like that. Like whether or not that was the the pastor's intent, it still hurt. It still felt very like directed. And
Well, yeah.
I'd never met the man, but
I think the point, well, but it can be personal without being
right.
naming you.
Yeah.
I think that's a whole other episode. I think that the point that I feel like Nedra's trying to make in the book is you don't have to, like, you need to, if you are already struggling with setting a boundary, then you set a boundary and it feels like you have to justify it and get buy-in from other people, and almost like you're almost doing this subtle permission seeking from them about whether it's okay for you to set this boundary, and you need them to understand why you're setting it so that they can give you permission to set it.
Right.
And so I think the reason behind her saying you don't need to explain it is stop this behavior of trying to get permission to set the boundaries. Just set the boundary. She doesn't really communicate it that way in the book as she's written it. And this is where I felt as I was reading it, like some of it was just really intense, I think is the word that I kept saying.
Yeah.
Like some of her examples feel like things I would never say. And not just because I struggle with boundaries. My therapist was like, interesting. And is that because, this is something that you need to work on? And I'm like, no. I mean, I get it. This is something I need to work on. And so part of reading this book is uncomfortable because of that. But part of it is like a communication style, I think.
Yeah.
And so I do think there is a difference between not explaining so that you can seek permission, even if you don't realize it's what you're doing. But it's not about like withholding information. Like, it doesn't have to be combative. Like, no, I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to tell you anything about it. The whole point of setting boundaries is to create more peace, not more tension.
Well, and I think she does explain, like, in the setting of boundaries, like, you don't owe anyone an explanation of you wanting to seek happiness and peace within your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that would, like, or seeking permission from them for those things. It is
so tempting when you are not comfortable setting a boundary because you just want to avoid whatever tension you think that's going to cause, or you feel obligated, or, all of those things. It is so tempting to try and dip your toe in the water by seeking permission, but then you just get walked over, and you end up resenting it even more, and it actually creates more tension in the relationship. And so I think that's her point behind don't over-explain it. Start with just stating what it is that you need. And then to your example, like if there's somebody that then has a question or wants to understand more, use good judgment, helping them understand the journey that you're on.
Yeah.
But if like you don't have to, like you need to think about whether or not that's going to benefit the relationship.
Right. Well, and to be clear, like I had never told my mom about my experience there. So I think had she known that, she probably would have not known to, she would have known not to ask.
Yeah, your mom's pretty, like, she pays attention to those kind of things. She's pretty thoughtful about that.
But I would say, like, going back to where this question that Jen posed originally came from, I think we're hardwired as children growing up when we try to set a boundary for something. The adult figures or the older siblings or whatever you want to say come to us and demand an explanation. And it's like this change of dynamic when you start to set boundaries and you're not giving them any reason. You're just saying, this is a hard no. Like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to, and not give them the reason. Because when you're young and they go, all right, who made this mess? Explain to me why you decided to just leave a mess here. It's like they want an explanation and detail as to why you've done something. And then as you grow up, you want the right to set the boundary to be like, I don't want to have to explain everything to you because I am my own person and I can set this boundary and I just need you to respect it.
Yeah, sometimes that's a boundary you have to set when people are trying to get information about why you're choosing what you do so they can manipulate you into doing something else. And I think there's a difference, and that's why you have to be really thoughtful about it. It's also like you're almost negotiating against yourself sometimes if you're trying to set a boundary and then like over explaining why so you can get them to buy into your logic. And then you end up negotiating yourself down. You give away, put all your cards on the table and give away all of your space. Where most of the time in healthy relationships where you're setting a boundary, they don't even need that. They just need to understand
Right.
clarity. I think an example you've shared in other podcasts is you had a friend who like, would text you, "Hey, do you want to go do XYZ?" And then you would like read it, not know how to respond. You kind of don't want to, but you don't want to say no. Um, and it's not because of them. It's just because of, whatever you have going on. And they said to you, like, just text me back and tell me,
Right. So I
like,
can make other plans.
no,
Yeah.
so I can make other plans. And so we have this whole thing about how, oh, I'm going to have to like send this justification about like why I can't come. And I'm going to have to do it in a way that they understand and that they buy in. And like I did this myself. There was a dinner that I was supposed to go to, and I had a lot going on with my dad and going back and forth. I like going to this dinner and being gone this whole entire evening when it was one of the few evenings that I had my own kind of space and sanity. I just didn't have the emotional bandwidth to do it. And it's not that I didn't want to go see the people. It's just that, like, I needed space for myself. I needed to recover. And I thought, how am I going to say I'm not going to go to this dinner? And I started to think through, like, this whole explanation about what was going on in my life and all these things. I think it was while I was reading this book. And so I didn't send that. Instead, I just said, hey, I'm really sorry. I'm not going to be able to make it, but I hope you have a great time. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. And they responded back and said, sorry, we're not going to see you. We'll miss you. And that was
Right.
it. Like I didn't need any permission for the decision that I made.
Maybe that's also another episode, the trauma for why we respond the way that we respond.
And so I've been trying to be more attentive to myself doing this because I do it a lot. I think at times
It's the people pleaser in us.
Well, and I think at times, like explaining yourself is really helpful. I try to do this like at work a lot, where I will explain why I'm making the decision that I make so that I can bring people along with me, create this transparency, and I get feedback that that's appreciated, right? And so I think like at times it's helpful, and then at other times it's like you just don't need all that.
Right. I would agree. And I do think she addresses a few things in the book in a like child to parent relationship. Am I making that up or am I remembering
She
that
did.
correctly?
In fact, she talked about parenting specifically. And if I go back to the question of what's a moment where I personally feel called out, I feel like I wish I would have understood this from a parenting standpoint as I was raising an elementary aged child. She talks about with her own kids how she tries to apply boundaries in allowing them to make choices for themselves and teaching them that they get to set boundaries. And to Ace's point earlier, like I think I knew I grew up in an environment where he grew up in an environment where you may have as well, where kids don't get to decide things. Like you do what you're told, and you don't get to decide what you're eating. You don't get to decide like
What
what you're
clothes you're gonna wear to
doing.
school?
Your choices are super limited, and you're the kid, you just have to obey. So she talks about this parenting, and for like this was actually interesting. I'm thinking about what I was feeling when I was listening to it. She talks about how when her children say they don't want to eat certain things, she respects that boundary. And I was just thinking, no, like you make what's for dinner and then they get to show up and eat it. But like I really kind of thought about that and I thought, well, how did that work out? Like what
How many nights was it a battle of wills?
Right. And like, did it have to be? And like, why? And of course, like, this is how I was raised. This is what I knew. This is how my parents were raised. Like, this was a really normal thing. And it's not suggesting that as a parent, you have to be a short order cook. Respecting your kids' ability, like teaching your children that it is actually okay for them to choose who they, hug, how they spend their time within certain guidelines. Like as a
Yes.
parent, part of what you have to teach them is where the boundaries are in
Right.
life and how to make healthy choices. But it doesn't have to be so rigid.
Yeah. I will definitely say, like, growing up, so I'm not a parent. You know that about me. Shocking.
Shocking.
But I will say, like, as I was listening to that and reflecting on my childhood, I will say, like, my have like distinct memories of my mom and dad telling stories about how when they were growing up, children were to be seen, not heard.
Oh,
And so
yes.
they did not want to raise children like that. And so
Mm.
I
They were really
think,
intentional about doing it different.
yes. And I do think, like, because of that, like, we were pushed a little bit more. And I'm not like we were, like, not in any, like, unhealthy way,
Yeah.
but, like, I remember I look back, you know how you have, like, those fundamental moments in life that, like, you look back to and they've kind of shaped the way that you have moved forward in life. I
Yeah.
remember having one of those conversations with my mom in high school, and it was about, like, my schedule, and I had to choose classes and things like that. And I basically was looking to her. At this point, I can reflect back and see that in the moment I could not, but I was looking for her to make the decision for me. And I just remember her, like, squarely stopping the conversation and saying, Christopher, this is like, you are going to make this commitment for the next year. So you have to choose what you want to do. And then you're going to have to live with those choices for that year, whether, it's something that's positive and great or whether it's not. Like, what are you learning from it? And how do you live life with that newfound knowledge? And I just, like, so appreciate that, because it does, like, in that moment, I go back to, like, that's when I learned, like, decisions have to be made. There are deadlines, and if you don't meet those deadlines, then that has consequences to it as well. And so I, of course, waited till the last minute to finish to submit my
Of course.
my schedule request. But then it helped me, like, look back on not making a decision is a decision and does have consequences.
Yeah.
And so do you want to try to hold some power, or are you willing to leave it to chance and see where you end up?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's see. Some of these questions that I prepared, we've kind of naturally answered.
It's like,
Did
us.
I did like how she challenged the reader to think about their life and where a boundary would be helpful. Because I thought in the first half of the book, she did a good job of, like, explaining what the boundaries are and why they're important. But then there was, like, a couple of moments where she said, or maybe it was in the exercises, where she's like, it's really important to think about where you're needing a boundary in order to improve your life, because maybe you don't consciously think of, I need a boundary to fix this issue that I'm having.
Yeah.
But I like the challenge of sitting there and going, oh yeah, it would probably be a good idea if I did X as opposed to Y. So maybe I need to be more conscious and purposeful about setting a boundary there and discussing it, and then holding myself and others accountable for
Yeah.
that boundary.
Well, what's really interesting, a lot of what I was thinking about, I think during the first half of the book, which I didn't really understand until she gets into, like, some of the content in the second half of the book. I think going in, I very much was thinking about, like, going back to my definition of boundaries, going in, things I will or will not do. Or will or will not tolerate, or, whatever. To me, setting a boundary felt like, but what do you do when people break the boundary? It feels like an ultimatum. And so if I am setting a boundary and then somebody breaks the boundary, but I don't hold to that, then am I just setting up all these ultimatums and basically, like, exerting my control on all of the people around me, because that doesn't feel right or comfortable. And she does address what do you do when you have somebody who your boundary and their boundary conflicts with each other. And that's kind of in the second half of the book,
Second
I
half,
think, that she
yeah.
talks about that. But she also talks in the second half of the book about ultimatums specifically, and acknowledges, like, that's not a healthy way to set up boundaries.
You've been listening to part 1 of our deep dive into Nedra Glover-Tawwab's Set Boundaries, Find Peace, here on Chris and Jen in the Morning. We've uncovered the why behind our boundary struggles, but the journey doesn't end here. How do we actually speak these boundaries into existence without the guilt? And what happens when the people we love push back? Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss next week's finale, where Chris, Jen, and Ace wrap up this book series with the practical tools you need to reclaim your peace. Until then, be kind to yourself and to one another, and we'll see you for part 2.